Hello, welcome everyone to Book Notes. I am so excited that we have this opportunity for this conversation on today for our book notes, because we have none other than Charlayne Hunter-Gault, who is without a doubt a luminary in our community. She has broken down journalistic walls. She has broken down walls of segregation. As a person who integrated the University of Georgia, she's been a part of the student movement. She is an activist, a writer, a cultural critic, a public intellectual. She's an artist, and she's a great aunt, by the way, mother. She is a wife, and she is a person who holds the mantle of sharing our culture with a new generation. It is truly an honor to have a person of her caliber to be with us for our book notes this afternoon. We first want to let you know that you can share information about book notes. This will be posted online, and we invite you to share with your family and with your friends, and we invite you to share with classrooms. This is free material that you can share with young people across the globe. But we're going to have a conversation with Charlayne Hunter-Gault about her latest book entitled My People: 5 Decades of Writing About Black Lives. Now, I will start by saying this. I lovingly call her Auntie Charlayne. I will be referring to her as Sister Hunter-Gault throughout this conversation, but I am excited to have someone that my family deeply loves and respects to have this conversation today about my people. 5 decades of writing about Black lives. We welcome to Book Notes none other than Charlayne Hunter-Gault.
Hello.
Sister Hunter-Gault, it is wonderful to see you, and thank you for being with us today on Book Notes.
Well, I'm so happy to be here, having just come out of your service, and I'm inspired by the service and happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. We are really excited about having this conversation today. As a matter of fact, I want to lift up the book for everyone. This book, My People: 5 Decades of Writing About Black Lives. And the beauty of your writing and your work is that you have been a witness. You are bearing witness around our culture. And before we get into your journalistic work, if you could share with the audience your experience attending the University of Georgia and how you made the decision to go to University of Georgia versus going to Wayne State or going to a predominantly or historically Black college in Georgia.
Well, thank you for that question, as they say on television these days, all the time. I initially had not thought about the University of Georgia. And this was, 1954, 55, 56, 57, 58, 5 years after the Supreme Court decision outlawing Brown v. Board of Education, outlawing segregation. And so one day at my predominant all-Black high school, Henry McNeil Turner, historical name, several of the activist Black men in Atlanta, including M. Carl Holman, who was a teacher at Clark, came to our school and asked the principal if there were any students who might be interested in going to one of the white colleges, because they felt that too much time had passed and they wanted to move on this great historical development. So when they asked for some of the best students, Hamilton Holmes was number 1, and I was number 2. I should have been number 1, too, but anyway, that's the way it goes. And so they sent for us and asked if we would be interested, and we said sure. So we go downtown with these gentlemen. One was a doctor, and the other one was, as I said, Hamilton M. Carl Holman. and they took us to Georgia State. Now, here's what, to me, after all these years, is interesting. Hamilton and I walked into the college. We looked at the curriculum, and everybody who was with us, the men, could not believe what we said. Hamilton was the first who said, this curriculum is not providing what I want. And I wasn't going to let Hamp get ahead of me. And I said, right, me either, in journalism. And so all of a sudden, Hamilton walked out onto the deck of the college, looked north, pointed, and said, I want to go there. And of course, he was pointing to Athens, Georgia, which is the location of the University of Georgia. And again, I wasn't going to let Hamp get ahead of me. And I said, yeah, me too. I want to go there. And the men looked initially a little perplexed because they didn't know anything about Athens. And they also knew that between Atlanta and Athens were some of the homes of various Ku Klux Klanners. But they figured out if they had two students who were willing to try this out, what could they say? So they said, okay, let's get it together. And that was how we started what ended up a couple of years later at the University of Georgia. We had to go to court. Constance Baker Motley, Donald Hollowell, Vernon Jordan, Horace Ward were among the people who made this possible by using the law and arguing effectively before a white Republican judge, Judge William Bootle. But they were so good, and Bootle was open to their arguments. And I remember one time Constance Baker Motley was asking one of the white officials a question, and she had interviewed him before, and somebody was heard in the audience saying, look at that, something like, silly man. He doesn't even know that a curveball is coming and about to hit him in the head. That's how good she was. And so those are my first recollections of those early days.
Wow. For those who are younger, you just mentioned three major sages that I think every young person should know who they are. And you had a relationship with them.
Yes.
Constance Baker Motley. If you could just start with Constance Baker Motley, please.
Well, that is kind of a funny story as well as a serious story, if you don't mind, because every day, I think it was about a week that the trial went on initially, and she never even looked in my direction, not even at lunchtime. I mean, there was one time when I was sitting in front of Vernon Jordan at this Black restaurant, and I had said I wasn't hungry, but Vernon ordered some sandwich or something, and I reached over, and at one point he smacked my hand and said, get your own lunch. So that was our relationship. He was just a few years older than me. But Constance Baker Motley, even at lunchtime, never said anything to me. She just was focused on her mission, which was desegregating the University of Georgia. And so the end of the week came, and we thought that I could go back to Wayne State, where I had, in Detroit, Wayne State University, where I had entered in order to wait to see what the case was going to produce. And so I wanted to leave that Friday so I could go back. It was December, and there were parties at Wayne State. And so I was looking forward to getting back to the parties. I was 19, right? And so I go and I sit in the car, and I am like sitting there like this. And all of a sudden, Attorney Motley gets in the car. Now, again, remember, she had not even acknowledged my presence up to that point. She gets in the car, and she turns and looks at me, and she says, I know how you feel. Now, this is the first time she's spoken to me, and she's telling me she knows how I feel. And before I could say, how do you know that? She said, because I was hoping to get back to New York to my husband and I think her son Joel was about 9 at the time. She said, I was hoping to get back to them this weekend, and now I've got to stay here. So I know how you feel. As she reached down to take off her shoes because she had problems with her feet. And that was the beginning of a relationship that was on another level from her representing me. And it just made all the difference in my life. And it was one, I learned a lot growing up because, I'm a PK, a preacher's kid. And that's how I got a lot of my sustenance from what I had been taught by my grandmother, who was a saint, and my grandfather, who was a preacher. And it just set me on the right path, I think, to entering Georgia, to put up with some of the stuff that went on, and to eventually graduate and start this career that led to this book. And I owe those people so very
Mm,
much. And I think of them all the time. And in some way, I think they're watching over me.
mm. It's beautiful. Yeah, Constance Baker Motley. And then you mentioned a name that some people may not know. You said Hollowell,
Yes,
who was an attorney in Georgia who really laid the foundation for what we know as desegregation and trained quite a few other attorneys, one being Vernon Jordan.
yes.
But could you share a little bit about Hollowell and his impact?
Well, Attorney Hollowell, my father was in the military. He served in 2 wars, even though the military was segregated. And I think I recalled in one of my books that, when he was in the war, the black soldiers on the field, if they would get wounded, he was the one who would go and say prayers to them. Now here he was, and here they were fighting for a country that didn't appreciate them as first class citizens. But that's how we've always been, going way back, and you know that too. And so Don Hollowell was one of the people who moved around the South, the entire South, along with Constance Baker Motley as well, um, working on helping Black people achieve their position as first class citizens. And he was every bit as aggressive and traveling very much as Constance Baker Motley. And he was the one who Vernon, when he graduated from law school, came to work as a clerk, a law clerk or assistant, whatever they call them, I forget now. But that's who Vernon wanted to work for because he realized the role that they were playing in ending separate and unequal.
Hmm. Now, you said something very interesting. You used the word desegregation,
Yes,
not integration. Now, I've heard that often, the distinction that yourself, my father, and others always make it clear: desegregation. We were not talking integration. Explain that difference for those who may not be aware.
well, desegregation is what we achieved through the law, but integration means integrating. I mean, it means that we have overcome segregation and we are now, hopefully, I guess, there's a piece back there my daughter did called Hope. Uh, Hopefully, we are integrating. Now, while we have integration of Blacks and whites and other people of color today, all in the same place, in so many places, there are still people who are trying to maintain segregation. But that's the difference. Desegregation means opening the doors, but integration means opening the doors fully so that the relationships that we have with one another could happen. I hope that was all right.
Oh, Thank you. Thank you for that. Now, I want to stop for just a moment of, as they say, station identification. You are watching Book Notes, and we are interviewing Charlayne Hunter-Gault. Her latest book is My People: 5 Decades of Writing About Black Lives. You can pick up a copy of this book on any online bookstore, but we encourage you to pick it up at Afroware, a Black-owned and a Black managed by a sister named Nzinga, who owns Afroware, who manages the bookstore at Trinity United Church of Christ. We invite you to pick up the book online through that source. But we also want you to share this conversation on social media. You can use the hashtag Trinity UCC or hashtag Trinity UCC Book Notes to follow the conversation. Now, Sister Hunter-Gault, I want to ask you about your journalistic career. Now, you wrote for several years for the New York Times, and what I found absolutely fascinating, is actually was blowing my mind, you were writing about what we would call today restorative justice. You were writing about programs in Harlem, about conflict resolution. You were writing about the African American Police Association in Chicago. And this was all in the 70s, about community groups doing work to reduce violence. And, well, matter of fact, could you tell us a little bit about the program in Harlem that was put together, this conflict resolution program, which probably was revolutionary then, that we are trying to get a program such as this in Chicago now?
Yeah, because as you know, we're learning every day, unfortunately, what goes around comes around. But all of our history, and that's why our history, our Black history, is so important, because you go back to programs like that, which I don't remember right now who started it, but there were people who kept their eyes on the prize, so to speak, and who wanted Harlem to be the kind of community that existed all over New York. And I heard about it. And again, I think one of the things I tried to achieve with the book, as I was putting things together, is to include pieces that nobody else was doing, because Black people weren't important. And so this kind of program, I think, was the kind of thing that it took imagination, it took commitment, and it took an understanding of our history and our current situation and where we needed to go. And so that's how that evolved. I can't remember now how I first heard about it, but when I heard about it, I thought, this is really unique. And that's when I went and covered that story. And I remember, if you don't mind me taking this moment away from exactly the question you asked, when I came from Washington, D.C., where I'd been working for local NBC, and I had friends working at the New York Times, and they said, oh, you got to come, you got to come, you got to apply. So they made an appointment with me with Arthur Gelb, the Metropolitan editor. And so I'm sitting there being interviewed by him, and he said, well, let me ask you this question. If I sent you to Harlem and you found up there a friend of yours whom you had known a long time, but he was doing something bad, would you be able to write about it honestly? And I said, you know what? If it was really bad, yes, I could. I said, but far too often, our people are accused of things that they did not do. And so that would be the first thing that I would look into, whether this man was really guilty of what he was being accused of. And that happened all the time. Even today, as you know, Black men and women, because there are more Black women, I think, in prison than Black men today, but it's the same thing. And so, in a way, that was prescient, but also, this was the white editor who asked me that ridiculous question, who also allowed me a little while later to open the Harlem Bureau, the first ever local bureau of the New York Times in the United States. And from there, I lived with the people. I took him up there shortly after I opened my office in a Black lawyer's room. He gave me a little room. And I took my white editor up there and I said, well, come on, let me show you a little of the community. So we start down 125th Street, and in front of us are coming 3 or 4 young Black guys, and he starts to get a little, like he's a little bit concerned about. I said, don't worry about it. I got this. So we reach the boys, and I say, excuse us. And they very politely moved aside and let us walk through. So that was always the kind of thing that was in my head about our people. We've got to teach people, Black, white, Latin, whatever they are, about our people in their entirety, which sometimes is not always good, but sometimes when they are accused of something that isn't good, it's because of their color. So we all in our profession need to be constantly aware of the need to create, what shall I say, to give context to all of our stories. I mean, like now, we got Black men in prison who are educating themselves. And when they come out, they survive because they're educated and they can get decent jobs. Now, the jobs are declining these days, but I just hope that places like Trinity, and you are doing this, embrace these people who are coming out of prison, prepared to live a different kind of life that took them in there, and they've got to be supported. And I think you're doing that, right, Reverend?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a part of our mission as a church, to be a space where returning citizens can fully thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've been at the New York Times. You're an absolute trailblazer. You are a walking library. So much information. You have these relationships with so many amazing individuals. I'm going to call a couple of names. You mentioned in your book, and I know that you have some more stories about these individuals. Roger Wilkins.
Oh, yes. I first met Roger Wilkins when my husband, Ron Gault, was working at the Justice Department. And Roger was an assistant or deputy, I forget which term, attorney general. And so our relationship was, I guess, in the first instance, personal. And eventually we developed a good, friendly relationship because of his association with my husband, who was not my husband at the time, but we were working on it. And so eventually he came to work at the New York Times, where I was also by this time working. And we developed a very good relationship. But he was covering different things from what I was doing. But we were very good friends. And he also was one of the people who knew his history. And so everything that he he approached with the consciousness of his Black history, which is again why I think Black history is so important. They help people, even those who have achieved, do even better than they might have otherwise, and also give them an ability to get other people to have a different perspective than what they might have. So he was a real trailblazer. And Ron and I attended his memorial service in Washington. And it was just wonderful to hear from all of the people who testified what a tremendous leader, compassionate person, effective individual, and race conscious man he was.
Now, for those who are a little bit younger, Roger Wilkins is on your test. You need to discover why I mentioned that name. So for the teachers who are there, we want you to utilize the name Roger Wilkins. The next name, many people know this name, but I want you to share some of the luminaries around this person. You had the opportunity when you were in South Africa to make connections with Nelson Mandela.
Madiba.
Yes, indeed. Please tell us not only about the relationship with Mandela, but there's a whole host of people that many times we don't hear their names, who worked to end apartheid.
You know, it was one of the most exciting times of my life, although sometimes it was challenging. Like when I first went there in 85, when Nelson Mandela and all of the other men who were sentenced to life in prison along with him, they were in prison still, and apartheid was raging. I mean, it was, well, let me just go back a minute, because one of the things that got me interested in going was the Black people who were demonstrating outside of the South African embassy in Washington, D.C., including Eleanor Holmes Norton and a lot of other people who were also successful at that time. And they were working in 85 to help end apartheid. So I went in 85, and, you know, as a journalist, again, I try to get everybody's aside. So when I got there, of course, Madiba Mandela was still in prison, but I wanted to hear from the people what impact he had had and the others who were in prison with him, and what difference it was making. But I also wanted to talk to those who supported apartheid, the white people whose government was still in control and doing what our governments had done during years of segregation. So I went and I interviewed them too. So that gave me a very good perspective on the country. And so when I finally went back, as when Mandela and the other prisoners were released, because I had covered the story on a continuous basis off and on, I had gotten to know a lot of the people in the African National Congress, and they knew me and knew what my position was, which was to get information that would work towards, I guess to say, desegregation or the end of apartheid. So they were pleased with what I had done in the past. So while the journalists from all over the world came when Madiba was released after 27 years in prison, they were all getting 10 minutes with him. Because remember, being in prison for 27 years, he didn't even know about television, for that matter, because there had been no television there. I mean, there was minimal television here, 3 channels. I wish we were back. No, I didn't say that. Anyway, I sit down when everybody else was finished and they came to get me for my half hour. It occurred to me that here was a man who knew nothing about media, for that part, and had been in prison 27 years and I forget how old he was, but he was up there, not as old as I am today, but he was up there. And I said, look, I'm so happy and this was, I don't know what to call it, because it was, anyway, what I said was, you think he could take a cup of tea before we sit down? And they said, oh, that's a great idea. So he goes inside of his little house in Soweto, and he comes back out and he's ready for the interview. So he sits down in the chair, and I want to establish a relationship, so he'll tell me things he hasn't told anybody else. So I say, oh, Mr. Mandela, I'm so happy to be here. And I just want you to know that I was a part of the American Civil Rights Revolution. And before I could get my next words out, he said, his eyes lit up and he said, "Oh, do you know Miss, um, Miss, oh gosh, oh, just went out of my head. Miss, what did he say? Do you know Miss Maya Angelou?" This happens when you're 80. You sometimes forget. But anyway, he said, "Do you know Miss Maya Angelou?" And I said, "Oh, yes. Well, I didn't know her personally, but I knew her work. So I don't think you could call that. Could you, Minister, a lie?" I said, "Oh, yes." And before I could say anything else, he said, "Well, we read." Oh, let me say one more thing before I go there. Everybody was looking for a scoop. And at that point, nobody had a scoop. But he opened his mouth and he said, "Yes, we read all of her books while we were in prison." Scoop! It was just a wonderful interview. And the next time I went down was for his service, his funeral service. And I was working part-time then for NBC. And NBC had set up a platform in front of a woman's house across the street from Madiba's Soweto house. And that's where they were set up. And she had a wonderful story, which I won't go into now. But what she told me was, when I took a break and went into the kitchen, she said, when Mandela got out of prison and came to Soweto, he walked up and down their little congested dirt road, meeting and greeting all of the neighbors. That's the kind of man he was. I mean, and I just think he was humble as well. He wasn't arrogant at that point. I mean, he had achieved an awful lot. In fact, when he was about to become president, I had set up this exclusive interview, and all of a sudden, I had tears in my eyes because I learned that my son Chuma was graduating from Emory University the same day that Madiba was being sworn in as the first Black president of South Africa. And so I said, "Madiba, I am so sad today." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I have worked on the stories that led us to this moment when you're about to become president. And I'm not going to be able to be here because I've got to be in Atlanta for my son's graduation." Madiba didn't miss a moment. He said, "Oh, no, you have to be there for him. You can interview me anytime." I wiped the tears from my eyes because in the end, that was true. Whenever I needed to interview Madiba, I was always granted the interview. It's been one of the most, shall I say, enriching parts of my career, to have met someone like that and to have had him relate to me in the way that he did. It just helps me keep on keeping on, even today when I tell that story, because you don't forget things like that.
That is absolutely beautiful. I want the audience to know first, we have a couple of shout outs. Lawrenceville, Georgia is in the house and they want to say hello.
Hello.
With Dallas, Texas, Friendship West Baptist Church says hello. Also, Sacramento, California is in the house. They say hello. And we have several notes that said they just say thank you. Thank you for who you are, for what you do. And you are an incredible blessing. We are now open for a couple of questions, Q&A. Now, for those of you who are online right now, our producer, Madam Cleo, will put your question in the chat for me. We will ask it to Sister Charlayne Hunter-Gault, our trailblazer, our icon, our sage, our luminary, who is with us today. If you have a question, just go right ahead. We have a few more minutes, about 9 minutes left, so put your question in. Now, before, as people are getting their questions ready, you also had a relationship with another great journalist. I have to say that I was so delighted to meet her one time. I have to say this, it was just touched my heart. I was in the aisle, this is before COVID. I was in the aisle after service shaking hands, and I see coming up the aisle Gwen Ifill. And my eyes got big. I said, "Oh, Mr. Ifill, Mrs. Ifill, oh my God!" I was like being like just a fanboy at that moment that she was in worship with us, just for worship, not not for anything. She was just hanging out with her friends. But share a little bit about the relationship, because you wrote a beautiful piece honoring her and her contributions.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the nice words you've said about her and that story you told, because it's so typical of when I would be in DC sometimes when she was still on the news hour. On Sunday I would go to the church that she attended, and there she would be sitting in that same seat she sat in every Sunday. And she was not full, she was competent, beyond competent. She was extraordinary as a journalist, but she would come in there like everybody else, sit somewhere way back in the back of the church, not come in late, not leave early, stay the whole time, and sing all the songs. Now, here's the thing that I think led Gwen to your church. She was a PK like me, a preacher's kid. And she like me had armor that our religion had provided for us, suits of armor that our history provides for us. And so not only was she an amazing professional journalist who also had to walk through some pretty awful racism when she started. I think it was in Boston, if I remember correctly now. And she had a rough time there, but she kept on keeping on as she had been taught to do, and eventually got to the position that she held at the news hour. And I just know that while I wasn't there, I know that she brought her history and that perspective into things that she covered. Now, not everything had to do with race, but it was a consciousness that allowed her to choose stories like I've done in my people that weren't being reported elsewhere, and to bring in people of color to talk about not just their own situations, but we know more about more things than we know just about our people. And so she brought all of her consciousness into her work as a professional journalist. And she, although younger than me, was a role model for me in so many ways.
I have a question here from you for Brother or Dr. Darwin. How have you managed to maintain outstanding health, mental and physical? And he is the director of the Edward G. Irvin Foundation. And thank you, Dr. Darwin.
Well, I think my mental health is in A plus, A plus. My physical health, for 80 years old, every now and then I wake up and I say, am I really 80? Because I still feel like doing all the things I've ever done, although there are some limits to what my body will do now. I got an arm that got a COVID vaccine booster the other day, and it's still sore. When I raised it then, I had to do everything but not frown. But you find the good doctors who can treat whatever is wrong with you. I had a 40-minute conversation with my Dr. Caballero in Sarasota the other day. I'm on the Vineyard, and he never rushed me. And he said, okay, now tell me a little bit more about that. And so I find good people That just reminds me of good trouble. You know who said that, right? But I find good people who help keep me fit as I can be as I age. And I'm grateful for that. And I think that that's really important for people to find people that they can, who are qualified, but who they can also relate to and tell stories about. I mean, my doctor's son and his daughter-in-law had a baby a few months ago, and she was born on my birthday. And so, in addition to our relationship, medically, I'm always sending him a little note about my Pisces sister. So that's what's important. And I think that the more I look at the stats these days of the inequality in many poor Black communities who are suffering the most, and the data shows that suffering the most during this COVID period, the more I feel that we have more work to do. Because I know in Sarasota, there's a historic Black community called Newtown, predominantly Black, and so many of the people there don't have computers. Some of them don't even have telephones. And some of them are not getting what I call good information. Because Jim Lehrer once said, if you give people good information, good news information, they will do the right thing. And yet, so many people don't have access. When I went to get my first COVID shot, one of the people there was a young Black woman who was telling me that very few Black people were coming in for the shot, but they didn't have the information. And then there was one time when my husband was working. I don't do politics, outside. I have them in my head, but not really publicly. But my husband doesn't have those constraints. So he's knocking on doors, getting people to register to vote. And he gets to one door and knocks, and this brother comes to the door and he says, I'm here to get you, hoping you will vote. And the brother said, now remember, this is when Hillary Clinton was running and after Barack Obama had been president for 8 years. The brother said to my husband, why should I vote? Ain't nothing happened for me in the last 8 years. That sticks with me in a way that is as painful as my arm, because that is a lack of information. And so I was talking to some friends of mine in Sarasota on a Zoom call the other day, and some of them are here on the vineyard. And I said, people have got to get out to talk to people about what is at stake in this country and what is at stake in our state. Because as you know, the governor there just sent a whole bunch of immigrants here to Martha's Vineyard. I still don't understand that. And maybe when I get back to Sarasota, I'll go and ask him, what was on your mind when you did that? I would really like to know. But that's what we're up against. There's still people who don't have a computer like this one, which works sometimes and sometimes it doesn't, but most of the time it does. People don't have access to the things that they need to live not necessarily a great life or a good life, but a decent life. And we've got to do something about that, whatever it takes, in whatever capacity we approach that.
Yes, indeed. Well, Sister Charlayne Hunter-Gault, it is a joy to be in your presence. It has been a joy to interview you. This goes up there, and they say I'm in high cotton right now. I'm in high cotton. To have
Southern phrase.
to speak with you. We've had so many people who are just sending in shout outs as we've been on this. My mother-in-law, Nani, Mother Deborah, Mama Brown, she says she loves you and just so thankful for you. And we're just so appreciative that you took time today. And I want to say one more time, you can pick up the book, My People, 5 Decades of Writing About Black Lives by Charlayne Hunter-Gault. If you go to Afriware Books today only, you will receive a 5% discount. Guess what? I know you can go to Amazon. I know you can go to Barnes and Nobles. You got an account there. That's right. But this is supporting a Black woman, supporting a Black business. We invite you to purchase this book. Purchase a couple of them, one for yourself and one as a gift. Share it with a younger person so that they will be blessed by this work. I guarantee you, when you read the book, you are going to be so blown away and fascinated that Charlayne Hunter-Gault has been a witness to history, a participant in creating our yet-to-be United States of America, and was one of the premier interviewers for Mandela, Nelson Mandela. Sister Charlayne Hunter-Gault, it's always a joy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.